So now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome today's first speaker, Carlos Aragon, Senior Vice President with Ipsos's Mystery Shopping Practice. Carlos, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ellen. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to just take 15 seconds to introduce myself. I have been with Ipsos for 11 years, been doing research for quite a bit longer than that, and have been part of the channel performance service line for 5 years. Over the last couple, 3 years, we have been looking at changes in retail as a result of COVID. And so Katie and I wanted to share some of the things we've learned. So Katie, you want to introduce yourself super quick?
Yep, I'm Katie Foltz. I'm a Director of Client Success in Channel Performance alongside with Carlos, and I have been doing research for over 10 years.
Awesome, thank you. All right, so I'm sure everyone's asking themselves, what are we talking about here today? So broadly speaking, there's three things that we wanted to share. Number one, consumers in 2023 expect retail to be an omni-channel experience. Pre-COVID, we saw a lot of retailers, a lot of merchants dividing the world into their .com and their brick and mortar sites, and consumers accepted that. Today, that's generally no longer the case. Secondly, technology is both a hindrance and an asset. It can help employees, it can help customers, it can also prevent certain things if used poorly. Lastly, employees can be fantastic assets as well if they are treated and trained accordingly. We've obviously seen a variety of challenges within brick and mortar retail, staffing, COVID, store limitations, things of that sort, but we wanted to talk about some of the ways that employees can be used and benefit retailers. So, talking about what we know today, as I mentioned, COVID brought about a lot of changes in the retail sectors. Pre-COVID, there were a lot of things that in store were considered table stakes. Pre-COVID, there were a lot of things that were somewhat differentiators, right? Inventory, access to products that were unusual. Post-COVID, so many merchants, so many retailers have integrated their online and offline channels that what were once differentiators are often now table stakes. What we have generally seen is omni-channel and the need for coherence, which is a fancy way of saying customers expect, whether it's Target or Target.com, that the experience be similar and easy. What we have also seen is that the successful retailers have adapted to that new mindset, and the unsuccessful retailers have struggled a bit.
Yeah, so to put it another way, what Carlos is saying is consumers aren't differentiating between offline and online. So Walmart is Walmart, Target is Target. It's equally important to be strong in both channels.
Yeah. So let's talk about the gorilla in the room, right? E-commerce. E-commerce has been a thing for 20 years, 25 years at this point. It grew in 2019 globally from about $3.3 trillion to about 6.3 estimated today, expected to achieve perhaps 25% of total share of global retail sales in 2024. It's a pretty significant chunk of money. The growth differs a bit by specific category of e-commerce. You know, fashion wasn't really a thing years ago. Now people buy a lot of their clothes online. Electronics and media, toys and hobby furniture, etc. You know, these things are all significant components of e-commerce. The thing that I want everyone to keep in mind, though, as you know, we're talking, I'm in Seattle, Katie's in St. Louis. I think most folks on this call are probably in the US. E-commerce as a share of total US retail sales is still less than 20%, which still means that brick and mortar matters a lot. It cannot be overlooked. It cannot be avoided. One of the things we've seen with the research Ipsos does is that while people spend a fair amount of time on e-commerce, they still buy things in the store. But maybe more to the point, you see the amount of time people spend in physical retail by category, from alcoholic beverages, where people don't do a whole lot of research online. They mostly go to the liquor store or the grocery store to buy it, down to categories like home electronics, entertainment, or travel, where they do a lot of pre-research, but then spend a significant amount of time in a physical location of some sort. So all of this is to reinforce the importance of the omni-channel and making sure that your online and your offline presence complement one another and reinforce each other.
Okay, so let's talk about the retail trends that we know. And Carlos mentioned a few of these earlier. First, staffing. Unemployment has dropped, but turnover rates are still high, and turnover means loss of knowledge. Inflation, along with COVID, has shifted the way consumers spend. They're changing how they spend, what they buy, when they buy it, and where they buy it. And then finally, technology. So innovations like touchless pay, BOPUS, driven by some of the things we just mentioned. And there's new technology out there, like AI. It's presenting a new opportunity, but also a challenge for retailers to understand how they can rein in that power and use it to their benefit.
So, Katie, one of the things you and I have talked a lot about with each other and with our colleagues is consumer expectations, or shifting consumer expectations of retail employees and retailers themselves. And one of the things we have been seeing both in the actual data and then hearing sort of word of mouth is that consumer expectations have gone up. What was acceptable 4 years ago is now no longer acceptable for a consumer. It's sort of this weird thing that I would characterize during COVID as consumers are essentially saying, if I'm going to risk my health by going into a physical store, that sales associate better be able to help me. That has carried over into a post-COVID world where those expectations are still very high, but it's always a question of our retailers, our retail employees delivering on those expectations.
Yeah. So to dig a little further into that, Carlos and I did work together to do a study in 2022 where we looked at what were the most impactful elements of offline and online shopping. From the analytics we ran, looking at online, UX, website organization, inventory, were all about equally important. But offline is what really stood out. Overwhelmingly, as you see on the screen, the sales associate is the single most impactful element of the customer journey. It's far greater than the other table stakes like store inventory, cleanliness, organization. Still important, but that sales associate, again, is really sticking out.
Yeah, and I think the thing that's probably important to mention about sales associates is that this is especially important in categories where there's a high touch, right? So things like buying mobile phones or home electronics or apparel, where that salesperson has always historically been a part of the process, that remains true, and the expectations have amplified. In a category like groceries, where very rarely do the employees need to be consulted on brand A versus brand B of milk or cheese or lettuce or whatever. The employees matter up to a point, but they matter mostly at checkout. But just keep this in mind that when we're talking about the sales associate, in this context, we are mostly talking about an associate assisting a customer prior to making a purchase, not at checkout.
Yeah. So what does this all mean? As Carlos mentioned earlier, brick and mortar still matters. In a variety of reasons. No confidence, or they don't understand it. 42% of our shoppers say online is more difficult. People have an immediate need. As Carlos mentioned, you still got to go to the grocery store to get food, medicine. There's some purchases you can't wait for that few days for it to arrive. There's things that they want to touch and feel, clothing, electronics. There's always going to be things that they want to go and see how the phone fits in your hand, or they want to validate. So there are places where they can, find some information online, look at other customer reviews, but there's something different about being able to go and speak with an associate and get those answers. So all that to say is it is important when someone goes into a store that sales associate is empowered to meet the customer needs.
Yeah, and I'll just sort of layer in one last thought on that, Katie. In categories like tech, telecom, apparel, getting the associate to confirm a decision that a consumer is trying to make is invaluable. Consumers are looking for that, and they are looking for that even more than they were 3 or 4 years ago.
Good point, Rose. So what should retailers do moving forward? How can they succeed? We have broken it down into 3 key items to talk with you guys today. First, employee training. So associates need to be able to demonstrate an understanding of your product or your service. Second, technology. Use it. Use it to empower your associates to further have better training, understanding of that product. And finally, remember, there's not a measure of success. So by implementing a program to reinforce the path for success, your associates are going to ensure their success, your success, and your consumer happiness moving forward. Let's talk a little bit about employee training. So question, does retail associate training meet consumer expectations today? Unfortunately, it seems like so a recent example, Carlos and I were kind of talking about that, what are some things that have happened to us when we've been visiting retailers that maybe were examples for things that didn't quite meet our needs or did. And I recently thought about upgrading my phone. I went to a phone store to talk about options, switching from iPhone to Android. And unfortunately, most of what the associate was sharing with me were things that I could see right there on those place cards. I was really looking for that associate to provide me some insight, something further than I could just see right there in front of me. A benefit of being able to physically go there, I mentioned earlier, is it's nice to be able to hold that product in your hand, and I was able to accomplish that part of my visit. But I really was looking to leave feeling, again, more empowered in my own decision-making process, understanding the features, benefits, and the comparisons why I might stay with one type of phone versus another. But they don't always go that poorly. And I think Carlos has an example of maybe a positive interaction he can share.
Yeah, and I think to just sort of close your example, Katie, I think one of the things we see and hear from consumers all the time is they don't necessarily want the associates to talk them out of a decision, but to just reassure them that they're making the right decision. And if an associate doesn't know, to use your example, the difference between an Android or an iPhone, that consumer's confidence goes way down and they become even less certain about their decision. And a lot of times what they do is they end up going to a different retailer altogether, some other place that can reassure them that they're making the right decision. But to sort of segue onto that, I had a really positive experience recently. I went to buy some jeans a few months ago and walked into the store, and it's a jean store. I wasn't expecting anything super fancy, but what I was really impressed by was the associate that helped me didn't just say, "Hey, can I help you?" And then when I said no, they walked away. They approached me in a very different way, and as I learned later, it's a very thoughtful and very intentional process that they've all been trained on. So the salesperson approached me, asked me what I was looking for, asked how I could help, asked how they could help me. I did the usual. No, I'm fine. She followed up a little bit and just said, hey, here's where this is, here's where that is, whatever. It prompted a question, right? And so I asked the question about, this pair of jeans versus that pair of jeans and the fit. I wasn't expecting much. Generally they know the price and they know the color and they can tell you this is in the back and this isn't in the back. This associate was super impressive because they knew the difference in fit. They were able to take a look at me and say, all right, well, this pair of jeans is going to be really tight around your thighs. This one is going to be really baggy around your calves. This one's going to fit really well with a belt. This one's not going to fit as good without a belt. And so instead of walking to a wall of jeans and having to make my own choices, my own decisions, they sort of shepherded me in a certain direction. And what I was expecting to be a 30-minute shopping trip with me trying on 10 pairs of jeans was about a 15-minute shopping trip with me trying on, I think, 3 pairs of jeans, all of which fit really well. And then it was a very simple choice of, do I like the black ones or the blue ones, and do I get a belt? And I ended up buying, I think, both pairs of jeans and a belt, all of which fit. I walked out of that store saying that was a surprisingly good experience. I was not expecting that. So that to me was sort of a, my expectations were low walking in, but I walked out of there thinking that felt good. That was easy. That was helpful. And I learned a couple of things. So ultimately, I think the key takeaways, right? You can kind of read this on the screen. I don't want to just read everything that's there, but there's a few different things to keep in mind. Nobody really expects every employee to understand the ins and outs of every single SKU in the store. But consumers do expect employees to know where things are, or if they don't know something about a product, how do I find out about that product, or who is the subject matter expert? A lot of stores will divide themselves by sections, right? You'll have an apparel section and apparel experts. You will have an electronics section and electronics experts. And employees should, at a minimum, understand the differences and be able to assist customers and get them the answers that they need. Even if they themselves can't answer the question, somebody can, or they can get it off of a tablet, or they can get somebody else to assist, a manager or a subject matter expert. Pressure testing is key. In the work that Katie and I do, a lot of the things we measure are how effective is the training, how good of a job are the displays doing at informing customers of things. And we find gaps, right? We find places where the displays are unsuccessful or the training is missing some key things. And those are really valuable to identify and then correct. So I don't know if you had any other thoughts on that one, Katie.
Yeah, so I think one way we see retailers pressure test is through looking for positive behavior and rewarding it in the moment. So we do a number of these types of programs where we have mystery shoppers going in and rewarding employees for positive behavior in the moment. That reinforces that behavior in the moment. They see it, they understand what they've done correctly. But something, if we want to go to the next slide, that is important to call out here is that it's important to make it part of your culture too. You want to reinforce on a larger level. Internal communications and bulletin boards are great ways to do that. So it's one thing to have a program where someone's getting that instant reward and that gratification, but it's another thing to really take it to the next level and make it part of your company culture, that you are recognizing those positive behaviors.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think the thing that I always have to remind myself, and you see it if you go to Reddit or the internet, and you go to websites where people talk about their experiences working in retail. Working in retail is a challenge. You have customers, you have employers, managers, supervisors, and everyone wants different things. The more you can do to support those employees with the proper training, and I think this is a great idea, Katie, the more you can do to reinforce the positives rather than bash people over the head for mistakes, the better an experience it can be, and therefore the better the results you'll get. Okay, so second point, technology. We sort of alluded to this a little bit and talked about it. As I said earlier, and as Katie has reinforced, consumers no longer distinguish between online and offline. An expectation was set during COVID that your online and offline channels were integrated together. So there was a certain amount of patience and grace given during COVID for supply chain issues and retailers really quickly trying to ramp up their processes and get everything working together. That patience is gone, right? At this point in time, consumers expect if they walk into a store that everything is talking to one another, that employee knows what's on the floor, that they know what's in the warehouse, that they know what's available online. That doesn't mean that they know it in their heads. It means that they have access to that information through the use of technology. So an example of that, I went to a home supply store, let's call it, right? They sell yard equipment and tractors and things like that. And I was looking for a particular product that the website said they had. I did not know whether they had it in that physical store, but we needed it that day. They didn't have it in that store. So we grabbed an employee. The employee jumped on a phone call, called a couple of different stores and said, this one, 10 minutes down the road, has it. I can have them hold it for you. That to me was an example of a fantastic customer experience. However, what was missing was the integration of technology. They knew where this thing was, but that employee didn't have it at his fingertips. He had to use old technology, right? He had to call somebody, which worked. But man, imagine if he had just had a tablet and the tablet said, yes, this product is down there. And he could have said to me in 2 minutes rather than 10 minutes, hey, do you want me to put this on hold for you or ship it to home? It was a good experience in general, but it could have been even better, which I think was kind of my key takeaway.
Yeah, unfortunately, I had a not so good experience recently when I went shoe shopping with my young kids. I've got 2 young boys, and turns out their feet like to grow and grow and grow. So for the summer, we wanted to make sure we got a pair of shoes that they could wear outside, get wet. It was going to be a relatively big purchase. And again, those feet just keep changing. So we wanted to make sure we knew what size shoes they needed. So I did take them into a store. I was able to accomplish the part where I got their feet measured and knew what size. But the associate brought out a very limited selection. They had maybe 1 pair in 1 color, and then for the other child, a different color, a different type. I was ideally looking to get the same type of shoe, same color for my kids. And they could have taken that moment to, even as Carlos said, just pick up the phone and call someone else, or ideally had a tablet to order or look and see if another store had it. But they unfortunately just said that this is all they could offer. So what happened? I walked out of that store. I knew what size shoes to order. I went online, found a different retailer with a coupon, and was able to, purchase them somewhere else. So I would have given my business to that store had they jumped on the opportunity to meet those consumer needs in the moment.
Yeah, and I think the point I want to reinforce there is twofold, right? One is there's no such thing as merely being a cashier, merely being a stocker. If you wear a name badge, if you have the uniform, consumers expect you to know or be able to get the answers to their questions and be able to support you as a consumer. In Katie's case, right? There were a couple of things that employee could have done. They could have taken a minor amount of initiative, called another store or offered to ship it to Katie's house or anything like that to keep the sale within that brand, but they didn't. So Katie went and found her own solution, which worked, and arguably was a better one because she got a coupon and therefore a discount. But employees are not magic. They don't necessarily know anything, and especially if somebody's new, they need help, right? And training alone is inadequate. There's a lot to know. It's a difficult job to be in retail. So this is where technology is absolutely key and can be a game changer. I think we've all seen different retailers where, if not every employee, a significant number of employees are equipped with tablets. And this is like the first thing that they do when a customer comes up and asks them a question, and they don't just immediately know the answer. Boom, they're doing something on the tablet. Tablets are relatively inexpensive. If you can link them to the inventory and the e-commerce storefronts, you can probably solve 95% of a customer's issues right then and there. All of that being said, right, you have to train people how to use the tablets effectively. They're not magic. People have to know how to use them. But the combination of training plus technology can be super helpful. I think the third thing is the training, in addition to being trained on culture and what products you sell and how those products work, is train people on how to use the tablets. I haven't seen this a whole lot recently, but during COVID, I remember a lot of employees who were clearly new and didn't quite understand how to use the tablets. And it was painful, right, to be there as a customer and they're struggling. You feel for them, you feel bad for them, but you can't help them, and in the meantime, you're getting annoyed because you just You just want to know, hey, where is this thing in your store, or how much does it cost, or how many of them do you need? I need 32 by 4s. Do you have 32 by 4s, or do I need to go to a different store to get 5 of them? So,
Yeah.
Katie, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so it's become, I guess, kind of a blessing and a curse that, we have apps and websites that we can now share our inventory with consumers, but it can also be problematic and frustrating when the consumer might have that information at their own hands quicker, or if that information is inaccurate. So as Carlos mentioned, part of this is also making sure that you're keeping that information, that database up to date, or as up to date as you can, so that you have the right information in the people's hands who need it.
Yep.
All right, so I think we are ready to get to our last point, which is what gets measured gets fixed. So we're going to share with you a few examples of the mystery shop and audit work that we've done that help you measure your performance and ultimately the impact on your bottom line. So the first one we have here is a loss prevention shop. The specific one is a self-checkout shop, but we do a number of shops where we look at manned checkouts as well. In this specific case study, the partner we're working with wanted to understand their self-checkout machine performance. So for our research, we identified a 5% error rate, which equated to a 20 million loss potentially a year. So to help our partner shrink this number, we implemented a mystery shop program. We could test the self-checkout machines and also make sure that employees are troubleshooting the errors, monitoring customers correctly. We do similar things again with manned checkouts, making sure they're scanning from top to bottom, looking for all items. This is twofold. We're helping look again to mitigate that loss, but also improve the customer experience. Again, all leading to less revenue lost for the retailer.
Yeah, another example. So OEMs, right? Original equipment manufacturers often don't have their own first-party sales. They sell through third-party. Computer manufacturers, phone manufacturers will sell through T-Mobile, Verizon, AT&T, Best Buy, GameStop, etc. And one of the challenges that they often have is, how do I get my product to be the product that a customer buys, right? Rather than, if you have a choice between Dell, Lenovo, HP, Asus, Acer, etc., how does your product get purchased, right? How does Acer get customers to buy an Acer rather than an Asus? So OEMs oftentimes are measuring recommendations. This tends to be a category where there's a lot of associate interaction with customers, and customers, they want to know, what does the associate recommend? And I've seen a couple of examples of associates being unwilling or incapable of making recommendations. But a lot of times the customer, like I mentioned this before, just wants a reassurance that they're not making the wrong decision. You go in, you say, I want an iPhone. The associate's probably not going to say, don't buy an iPhone, buy an Android. But the customer does want the associate to say, yeah, cool. iPhones are great phones. Here's why. Here's a couple of things you need to know. Now, do you want this iPhone or this iPhone or this iPhone? And what color do you want it? But we had one example of an OEM who they learned that what was the key to helping them improve their sales outcomes was getting their products recommended by the sales associate. So even if a customer would come in and say, I want product X, there was a benefit to having the associate say, well, okay, product X is great, but have you considered product Y? And in their case, what they realized, and what we were able to prove through the use of analytics and financial analysis, was that improved sales, like if you were the number one device or the number one product mentioned, it improved the sales outcomes by 10 to 15%. And in certain markets, that was a 25% increase in sales. But think about that. By focusing on one specific metric, the recommendation rate, and figuring out how to get your sales associates to recommend your product consistently, not necessarily every single time, but make it consistently the most recommended product, you were able to, this particular client was able to see significant revenue gains, tens of millions of dollars in additional revenue by shifting their focus on training from product features to just make the recommendation for this particular product. So they shifted their training, they adjusted what they were focused on, and as a result, they've seen better outcomes.
So finally, we have an example of how you can tie your measurement standards back to your sales. So for a gas and oil company's audit program we work with, we looked at their compliance rates, from their audit program against their sales volume. And what we found was over 2% year-over-year growth for fully compliant sites. So what does that mean? It means if you're meeting what we define as your brand standards, you're going to grow your business. So this is the type of analysis we offer to our clients to further tie things they should be looking at and focusing on to help them reinforce, again, when we're measuring, when we're looking at things that matter, and this is why they matter, and they'll ultimately lead to the path for success. So what should you take away from the training today? In short, the most important thing we want you to take away from the training today is not underestimate the power of the associate and its place in the customer journey. As we've mentioned, offline is growing and equally important, but online, this still matters. And to do this, remember our 3 items we talked about today. 1, employees need to understand your service and your product. 2, they need to be empowered to meet the needs of the consumer in the moment through technology. And 3, make sure you measure it, because what gets measured will get fixed.
Awesome. So here's how to get in touch with us. Katie, I know a couple of questions came in while we were chatting.
Yep. I'm going to pull those up. Let's see. All right. So first question, are there differences in things retailers should do by category? For example, in home improvement, appliances, restaurants. Carlos, you want to take that one?
Yeah, and the short answer is yes. The longer answer is, I think the examples we kind of talked about in our first 2 case studies are a great illustration of it. If you are a third party trying to sell through a retailer, right? This is not your storefront. What you probably need to do more than anything is train those third party salespeople on your product, on recommending your product, on speaking intelligently about your product, making sure that they are confident and know what they're talking about. It is in that case very product specific. If you are a retailer yourself and you are trying to figure out what do I do with my employees in my thousands of locations across the country, you do not care, and you really shouldn't care about training them on very specific products. What you need to train them on is a little different, which is how do I get those associates to diagnose and understand a customer's request, need, question, etc., and then how do I help them solve it? And so the training in that case, or kind of the focus, is a little different. In the first example of a third-party OEM, it is very product training focused, and in the example of a first-party retailer, you may de-emphasize the training and focus on technology solutions instead. That might be more cost-effective than trying to train everybody constantly, especially with the amount of churn that you get in retail.
Let's see, kind of similar question. I can take this one. What specific things do we need to train employees on? So as Carlos said, I think there can be differences between industries, but generally speaking, how to make a recommendation. So I go to a restaurant. I'm one of those people who always says, what do you recommend to the server? And if they say, oh, I'm new here, I don't, sorry, I haven't been here, I haven't eaten that yet, that usually leaves me not feeling confident and maybe not as excited as someone who says, oh, these are my favorite things on the menu. Or even if they haven't been there long, if they say, these are the popular items. Again, just kind of doing the homework for the consumer. And I think that's really the big message here that we're trying to share with you is consumers want you to do the work for them, especially when they get all the way to a location. Is, you know, if they get there, they want you to be able to answer their questions. They know that not every associate is going to have all the answers, but maybe they do pick up the phone, or they know who to go to, the manager who might be able to have a tablet and pull up those answers. Really just have them be empowered to get confirmation on things like inventory. Again, not putting it back into the consumer's hands to go home and look online, but really take that on for them. I think we have one question, Carlos. Should we ever tell customers to go to our website?
If you want to lose the sale, yes. I think you actually just said it really well. You know, when a customer is in your physical location, they're expecting you at a minimum to meet them halfway, if not to do more. So saying I can't help you, I don't know this, go to the website is another way of saying to the customer, I don't care about your issue. I don't really want to help you. Go make it somebody else's problem. I know it's a little bit of a negative way to look at it, but that's the message that gets communicated, versus just pivoting it slightly and saying, you know, hey, let me look this up on our website. Oh, look, here are the different, you know, you have different color choices, right? We have 3 color choices in this physical store, but online you can get 27 different color choices. Do you want one of them shipped to your home? Do you want them shipped to the store and you can pick it up here in a couple of days? Do you want to go to this other store that has the colors that you do want? But helping the customer solve their problems and answer their questions is kind of key. I think if you ever tell a customer go someplace else, they will do that, and they will probably go to a different retailer altogether, or at least there's a good chance that they will do that. All right, so I think with that we are done. Are there any other questions, Katie?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate your time and attention, and hopefully you were able to learn something.
Thank you.
I just want to jump in. I want to thank Carlos and Katie for today's presentation and the case studies they shared. And thank you all for joining us. If you have any more questions, please feel free to reach out directly to our experts. And in the meantime, be on the lookout for a link to today's recorded presentation, and that should be coming before the end of the week. That now concludes today's awesome webinar. Have a wonderful day, everyone.